The cobblestones of Weatherfield had borne witness to decades of secrets, but the heavy damp air hanging over the street felt entirely different on this particular late June evening. The familiar red brick terraced houses stood like silent sentinels under a bruised sky, completely unaware of the fracturing reality taking place within the flat shared by Sarah Platt and Detective Constable Kit Green. Inside, the silence was absolute, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a wall clock that felt less like a marker of time and more like a countdown to an inevitable ruin. Sarah sat at the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had turned a stark, bloodless white. Her mind was a chaotic blur of overlapping memories, a terrifying loop of images that had refused to leave her since the disastrous dinner party only 2 nights prior. She could still hear Maria Windus's voice ringing in her ears, sharp and accusatory, cutting through the tense atmosphere of the room as she demanded the truth about Sarah and Gary Windus's secret huddles. The neighborhood had assumed it was a sordid, clandestine affair, a classic Weatherfield betrayal born of old flames and proximity. But the truth that now sat between Sarah and Kit was infinitely more catastrophic than an illicit romance. The reality was that the hushed conversations with Gary had nothing to do with unfaithful desire and everything to do with survival, because Sarah Platt was the one who had ended the life of Theo Silverton. The dark flashback that had consumed her thoughts for 48 hours straight replayed behind her eyes with agonizing clarity. She remembered the suspicious text message that had flashed across her phone screen, appearing to come from Todd Grimshaw but in reality serving as a trap designed by the volatile and drunk builder. She remembered walking into the shadows of the scaffolding erected outside the flat, her heart hammering against her ribs as Theo stepped out of the darkness, his breath heavy with alcohol and his words dripping with venomous threats of violence. In that moment of absolute terror, cornered high above the street with no escape, her survival instinct had completely overridden her rationality. Her fingers had closed around a heavy, cold piece of loose metal piping lying on the wooden planks. When Theo lunged forward, she had swung blindly, a desperate act of self-defense that connected with a sickening thud against the side of his head. The momentum had sent him crashing backwards, over the precarious edge of the scaffolding, falling down to the concrete below. That fall had triggered a whirlwind of frantic cover-ups, with Gary stepping in to help her hide the truth out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, but the house of cards was now completely collapsing. DS Lisa Connor-Swain was already sniffing around the discrepancies in Sarah's timeline, noting that her insistence on the attack happening at precisely 9:10 in the evening did not align with the testimony of other neighbors or the bizarre behavioral changes noticed by Jody Ramsey. To make matters infinitely more complicated, Sarah had discovered a velvet ring box hidden deep within Kit's bag earlier that morning, a heartbreaking sign that her detective partner had been preparing a life-changing proposal just as her world was about to catch fire. Now, Kit stood by the window, his tall frame blocking out what little light remained of the fading afternoon. He was not looking at her as a boyfriend would, nor was he looking at her entirely as a police officer. He was caught in a brutal, internal war between the badge he wore and the woman he loved, a conflict that was threatening to tear his professional and personal life apart at the seams. Kit finally turned away from the window, his face a mask of intense concentration that Sarah had rarely seen during their time together. He crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps, the floorboards groaning slightly beneath his weight as he knelt down in front of her, gently but firmly taking her cold hands into his own. He looked directly into her eyes, searching for any remaining trace of the vibrant woman he had planned to build a future with, finding only a terrified shell paralyzed by the fear of a lifetime behind bars. Kit explained that the net was closing in much faster than she realized, revealing that Lisa Connor-Swain had already ordered a forensic review of the scaffolding site and was openly questioning why Gary had been spotted near the area with his van shortly after the estimated time of death. The police knew that someone had manipulated the scene, and it was only a matter of hours before Todd or Jody let slip a piece of information that would shatter Sarah's fragile alibi completely. Kit told her that if she stayed in Weatherfield, she would be arrested by the end of the week, and once the formal charges of manslaughter or murder were filed, there would be absolutely nothing he could do to protect her from the full weight of the judicial system. The detective in him knew every loophole, every blind spot in the local surveillance, and every routine of the shift patterns at the station, and it was this darker, more manipulative side of Kit Green that was now taking control of the situation. He admitted that he had already begun tampering with the digital logbooks at the station, subtly altering the timestamps of the neighbor interviews to create a temporary window of confusion for the investigation team. However, he emphasized that this was merely a stalling tactic, a brief reprieve that would buy them 24 hours at the absolute most before the senior investigating officers noticed the discrepancies and demanded accountability. Kit looked at her with a fierce, unwavering intensity and told her that she needed to leave Weatherfield immediately, abandoning her life, her family, and the factory, because fleeing the country was her only remaining chance at maintaining her freedom. Sarah's breath hitched as the sheer finality of his words washed over her, the realization that her life on the street was effectively over crashing down upon her like a physical blow. She asked about David, about her mother Gail, and about how she could possibly just vanish without destroying the people she loved, but Kit was unyielding, reminding her that a sudden disappearance would cause them pain, but watching her dragged away in handcuffs to face a murder trial would ruin them permanently. The plan Kit outlined was meticulous, born from his deep understanding of how fugitives were tracked and caught in the modern age. He instructed her to go back to her mother's house under the pretense of feeling unwell, pack a single, inconspicuous bag with cash, essential clothing, and absolutely no electronic devices that could be tracked via cell tower triangulation. He warned her that her phone had to be left behind, switched on and sitting on her bedside table, to make it appear as though she was simply resting inside number 8 Coronation Street while they secured her escape route. Kit would use his police credentials to secure a hire car under a pseudonym, an administrative trick he had learned from dealing with undercover operations, and would park it 3 streets over behind the abandoned warehouse district where no traffic cameras were currently operational. He told her that she had to slip out through the back channel exactly as the dusk settled into true darkness, avoiding the main street entirely where David or Audrey might spot her from the salon windows. Sarah listened in a state of suspended animation, nodding numbly as the gravity of becoming a fugitive settled into her bones, knowing that from this moment onward, her life would be defined by shadows, aliases, and the terrifying knowledge of what lay buried beneath the scaffolding. The transition from a respected factory manager to a woman running for her life began with a silent trek across the familiar cobbles, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sarah managed to slip into number 8 while David was out searching for the dog, the house blessedly empty and echoing with the familiar domestic sounds that had always brought her comfort, but now felt completely alien. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, stuffing a few changes of dark clothing into a canvas backpack, her hands shaking so violently that she dropped a framed photograph of her children onto the carpet. She picked it up, staring at the smiling faces captured in a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes as she realized she might never hold them again. She forced herself to place the frame back on the dresser, swallowed the lump of grief rising in her throat, and systematically laid her mobile phone flat on her bed just as Kit had instructed. The silence of the house was suffocating, a heavy reminder that her departure would leave a void that could never be properly filled or explained to the tightly knit community outside. By the time she crept out into the narrow, damp tunnel behind the street, the sky had turned a deep, obsidian blue, and the distant sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the rover's return felt like a cruel mockery of her desperation. She kept her hood pulled low over her face, her eyes darting nervously to every shadow as she navigated the maze of back alleys, her heart leaping into her throat when a stray cat knocked over a plastic bin lid a few feet away. Every sound was magnified tenfold. Every rustle of the wind through the overgrown weeds felt like the approach of Lisa Connorswain and a fleet of police cruisers. She finally reached the desolation of the warehouse district, the air thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water, where the nondescript silver sedan Kit had promised was waiting in the darkness, with its engine idling silently. The door clicked open from the inside, and Sarah lunged into the passenger seat, slamming it shut behind her as if she could shut out the entirety of her past life with a single movement. Kit was behind the wheel, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, his face illuminated only by the faint, greenish glow of the dashboard instruments as he shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving Weatherfield behind in a cloud of exhaust and shattered dreams. As the silver car accelerated onto the dark ribbon of the M60 motorway, away from the familiar skyline of Manchester, Kit began to explain this secondary phase of the escape, his voice clipping along with a chillingly professional precision. He revealed that he had used a confiscated identity from an old immigration case file to secure a ferry ticket from the port of Holyhead to Dublin, a route that offered fewer biometric checkpoints than the major airports during the midnight shifts. He told her that once she landed in Ireland, she would need to keep moving south, using cash for everything and staying in small, independent bed and breakfasts that did not require digital passport scans at check-in. Sarah stared out the side window, watching the streetlights blur into long, continuous streaks of yellow light, feeling a profound sense of vertigo as the familiar geography of her existence dissolved into the unknown. She looked down at Kit's bag resting between the seats, the faint outline of the ring box still visible through the fabric, a devastating monument to the life they could have had if a drunk builder hadn't stepped onto that scaffolding. Kit noticed her gaze but said nothing, his eyes locked firmly on the road ahead, knowing that the man who had bought that ring was effectively dead, replaced by a rogue cop who had just crossed a line from which there was absolutely no turning back. The miles rolled on in a tense, claustrophobic silence, the rhythmic thudding of the tires against the motorway expansion joints serving as the heartbeat of their flight. Sarah found herself wondering how long it would take for David to realize she was gone, imagining the exact moment he would walk into her room, see the silent phone on the bed, and begin to piece together the terrifying truth that his sister was a murderer on the run. She thought of Gary, left behind to face the escalating pressure of the police investigation alone, wondering if he would crack under the strain and save his own skin by pointing the finger at the woman he had tried so hard to protect. Kit suddenly broke the silence, his tone dropping to a low whisper as he warned her that the hardest part of the journey would not be the border crossings or the fake identities, but the mental burden of carrying a secret that could never be shared with another living soul. He told her that from this night onward, Sarah Platt no longer existed, and she would have to learn to look in the mirror and see a stranger, a woman reinvented by necessity and bound forever to the dark memory of a metal pipe, a fatal fall, and a detective who ruined his own life to set her free. This video from the official channel offers a look at the dramatic events leading up to this point in the storyline.